This is my father, Daniel said, pointing up at the tall, unsmiling man beside him. A 7-year-old boy stood in the middle of a hospital hallway and introduced a billionaire as his father. 3 nurses froze. Park Sung-jae did not just freeze. He nearly choked on his own water. Daniel didn't notice. He never noticed when adults panicked. He just kept going. He doesn't agree yet, Daniel added, calm as anything. But I know he'll come around. The nurses looked at Daniel, then at Sung-jae, then at Dr. Tessie, who had just walked around the corner and into the worst moment of her week. Tessie wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Mr. Park, sitting in his wheelchair behind all of them, was laughing so hard he nearly tipped sideways. Here's what you need to know about the man Daniel had just claimed as his father. Park Sung-jae was one of the most feared businessmen in South Korea. He had survived hostile takeovers. He had buried rivals twice his age. Grown men reportedly canceled meetings just to avoid sitting across from him. What he had not survived, what he had no plan for, no strategy for, no army of lawyers prepared for, was a 7-year-old boy who had decided, all on his own, that he was getting a new family, and he was not asking permission. If a 7-year-old just casually claimed a billionaire as his father in front of a hospital full of nurses, you already know this is going to be a ride, and exactly the kind of trouble Daniel is about to cause. Stay with this one. It gets better. Like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had started yet. Daniel was just a boy who spent too much time at a hospital. His mother, Dr. Tessie, was 28 and already one of the most trusted doctors on her floor. She worked long hours. She had no husband, no nanny, and no time to pretend she did. So on the days she couldn't find anyone to watch him, Daniel came to work with her. He had his own chair in the staff lounge, his own snacks in her locker. The nurses knew him by name. Daniel didn't mind. He liked hospitals. People always had interesting things to say when they thought they were dying. That's how he met Mr. Park. Mr. Park was 60, Korean, recovering from treatment, and parked permanently in a wheelchair by the window of room 412. He was lonely in the specific way old men get lonely when their wives have been gone a long time and their sons are too busy to sit down. Daniel walked in uninvited the way he walked into everywhere. "Are you going to die?" he asked. Most adults flinched at that question. Mr. Park didn't. "Maybe," he said. "Not today, though." Daniel nodded, satisfied, and sat down like he'd been invited. "Good. I don't have time to be sad today." Mr. Park laughed for the first time in days. That was the whole beginning. No big moment. No music swelling. Just a boy who asked the question everyone else was too polite to ask, and an old man who finally got to answer it honestly. After that, Daniel visited every day. He brought questions. Endless ones. Why do old people sleep so much? Did you ever rob a bank? Is your wife in heaven or did she just leave? Mr. Park answered every single one seriously. Nobody had asked him real questions in years. Everyone around him whispered and tiptoed like he was already gone. Daniel just talked to him like a person. Mr. Park started looking forward to 4 p.m. more than he looked forward to his own recovery. Then came the visits from his son. Park Sung-jae arrived 3 times a week, always in a suit, always checking his watch, always speaking to his father in short, clipped sentences before leaving again. He didn't smile. He barely sat down. The first time Daniel saw him, he froze for a second. Just a second. Then he turned to Mr. Park and whispered, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Is he in trouble with someone?" "No," Mr. Park said, fighting a smile. "That's just his face." Daniel studied Sung-jae like he was a puzzle missing pieces. "Mr. Too Serious," he finally announced. Mr. Park burst out laughing so hard a nurse came to check on him. Sung-jae did not find it funny. At all. But Daniel had already decided the name fit, and once Daniel decided something, it stayed decided. From then on, every visit came with questions Sung-jae had never been asked in his entire adult life. "Why don't you smile? Do billionaires have friends or just workers? Why do you always look angry even when nothing happened?" Sung-jae had no answers. He'd spent 25 years building walls so high that nobody dared ask what was behind them. A 7-year-old just walked straight through the front gate. Daniel watched both of the adults in his life, his mother and Mr. Too Serious, and noticed the same thing about each of them. Neither one ever smiled unless they had a reason to. Neither one ever talked about feelings. Neither one had anyone waiting for them at the end of the day. Except him. He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about everything. Then he reached his conclusion. Mummy's love life is 0. He said out loud to absolutely nobody. Mr. Too Serious' love life is also 0. He nodded once like a man closing a business deal. They need each other. Somewhere down the hallway, completely unaware that his fate had just been decided by a child, Park Sung-jae checked his watch and walked toward his father's room. He had no idea what was coming. Operation Mummy Marries Mr. Too Serious had officially begun. Every good plan needs a partner. Daniel chose Grandpa. I need your help, he said, dead serious, the next afternoon. With what? Mummy needs a husband. Your son needs a wife. I already decided they should marry each other. Would you let your son marry my mummy? Mr. Park sat up a little straighter in his wheelchair. This was the most interesting thing anyone had said to him in months. Finally, he said, someone with a plan. Tell me what to do. And that was it. A 60-year-old man and a 7-year-old boy, suddenly co-conspirators. Their first move was simple. Force them to sit together. Every time Tessie came to check on Mr. Park, Daniel was already dragging a chair across the room. Sit here, Mr. Too Serious. Next to Mummy. I don't take orders from children, Sung-jae said. He sat down anyway. Then Tessie walked in. She stopped at the door first. Looked at the two of them, sitting close, neither one saying a word, both clearly uncomfortable. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. Daniel. What? I just thought you'd both be more comfortable together. Nobody in that room was comfortable. That somehow was the whole point. The introductions came next. Daniel found a nurse refilling supplies in the hallway and tugged her sleeve until she looked down. That's my mummy's future husband, he said, pointing at Sung-jae like he was presenting evidence in court. The nurse blinked twice, looked at Sung-jae, looked back at Daniel. Oh, she said slowly. Congratulations. I have not agreed to this, Sung-jae said, a little too sharply. Yes, that's true, he hasn't agreed yet, Daniel said, calm as ever. But he will. Word like that doesn't stay still in a hospital. It moves. By the end of the week, nurses on the floor had started calling Sung-jae the husband when he wasn't around to hear it. Half of them didn't even know his real name. They just knew him as the serious one Daniel had claimed. Sung-jae found out eventually. His ears went red. He didn't say a word about it to anyone, which somehow made it funnier. Mr. Park lived for it. Then came the elevator. It happened by accident. No Daniel. No Mr. Park. Just Tessie and Sung-jae, alone, doors sliding shut. The numbers climbed slowly. 11 floors. I apologize for my son, Tessie finally said. Eyes fixed on the panel above the door. It's fine, Sung-jae answered. That was it. That was all either of them said. But the silence after it didn't feel empty. It sat there between them, heavy and a little too long. The kind of silence two people notice but neither one breaks. The doors opened. They stepped out in opposite directions, and neither one mentioned the elevator again. Daniel asked about it anyway the second he saw them. Did you talk? Did you smile at her? No, Sung-jae said. That's okay, Daniel said, patting his arm like a coach consoling a player after a small loss. Baby steps. Around that same week, a different doctor started lingering near Tessie by the coffee machine. Young, friendly, clearly interested in the obvious way men get when they're trying not to look interested. It was nothing. A few minutes of conversation here and there. Sung-jae noticed it anyway. He told himself it didn't matter. He kept telling himself that the whole time his jaw stayed tight. The whole time his eyes kept drifting back toward that corner of the hallway without his permission. Daniel was the one who caught it. He was sitting nearby with a juice box, swinging his legs off the edge of a chair, when he saw Sung-jae's face change. Just slightly. Just enough. You're staring, Daniel said. I'm not staring. You've been staring for 1 whole minute. I counted. Sung-jae looked away immediately, which only proved Daniel right, and Daniel knew it. He turned to Mr. Park, slow and certain. "He's jealous," he whispered. Mr. Park looked over at his son, then back at Daniel, and started laughing so hard he had to hold the armrest of his wheelchair. Sung-jae's face was filled with embarrassment. He hadn't been embarrassed his whole life like that, and the worst thing is that he couldn't do anything about it cause inside him, he knew the boy was right. The small moments kept stacking after that. Chess games where Daniel insisted Sung-jae play like a husband would, whatever that meant. Snack time where Daniel handed him 2 juice boxes instead of 1. "This one's for you, this one's for Mummy, you have to share things now." A drawing taped to Mr. Park's wall, for stick figures under a crooked yellow sun, labeled in Daniel's handwriting, "Mummy, Mr. Too Serious, Mr. Park, me. I have a name," Sung-jae said quietly, looking at it. "I know," Daniel said. "Mr. Too Serious just fits better." Sung-jae looked at that drawing longer than he meant to. He never told anyone that. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. There was no warning for it. No build-up. Daniel was just sitting there with his juice box like always, and then he looked up, looked straight at Sung-jae, and asked the question he'd clearly been saving. "Would you marry my mummy? Your daddy already agreed on your behalf though. I just thought to still ask you." The room went still. Tessie's chart slipped from her hands and hit the floor. Nobody picked it up. A nurse near the door stopped walking, 1 foot still in the air. Mr. Park, who had not stopped laughing once in 3 weeks, didn't laugh now. Sung-jae's jaw tightened. His hand, resting on the back of his father's wheelchair, went still. For a man who had an answer ready for every boardroom he'd ever walked into, he had nothing. No deflección. No clever way out. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. For 3 long seconds, nobody in that room breathed. Then, slowly, he turned his head. And for the first time since any of this started, he looked at Tessie. Not a glance. Not an accident. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he's been avoiding looking at, for a reason he hasn't admitted to himself yet. She looked back. Neither one said a word. Tell me in the comments. Do you think he says yes? Like this video if you're as nervous as Tessie is right now. Nobody rushed anything after that Tuesday. But nobody could go back to pretending either. Daniel started calling Mr. Park Grandpa the very next morning. No announcement. Like he'd been doing it his whole life. "Grandpa, do you want apple juice or the orange one?" Mr. Park went completely still. For a man who'd survived many things without flinching, 1 word from a 7-year-old nearly undid him. "Orange," he managed. He didn't correct it. He couldn't have, even if he'd wanted to. His throat wouldn't let him. A nurse caught him later that night, alone, saying the word out loud to himself, testing it. "Grandpa," like he needed to make sure it was real before he let himself believe it. He saw her watching. Neither of them mentioned it. 2 days later, Daniel walked in wearing the face that meant trouble. "I've made a decision. God help us," Mr. Park muttered. "Mr. Too Serious has visitation duties now. I have what you missed yesterday. I had a board meeting that lasted 6 hours. That's not a valid excuse," Daniel said. He folded his arms exactly the way his mother did when she'd already won an argument. "Also, it helps you see my mummy every day. So really, I'm doing you a favor." By that afternoon, a schedule was taped to the wall, written in handwriting that drifted slightly downhill across the page. "Grandpa visit schedule. Daniel every day. Mummy every day. Mr. Too Serious. Every day. New. And no exceptions." "I didn't agree to this." "It's on the wall now," Daniel said. "Walls don't lie." Sung-jae stared at his own name for a long moment, like he was looking for a loophole. He didn't find one. He came the next day anyway, and the day after that, and stopped mentioning the schedule altogether, which Daniel considered a total surrender, and Mr. Park considered the funniest development of the year. Daniel had retired the original line. Now it had stages. To one nurse, "This is my future father." To another, a week later, "This is my father in training." By the time he told the head nurse, dead serious, "We're just waiting on paperwork," she didn't even glance up from her clipboard. "Good luck with that," she said, and kept walking. Sung-jae had stopped correcting any of it. Correction had never once worked. He downgraded to a long-suffering silence that Mr. Park found more entertaining than actual protest. But underneath the jokes, something had shifted that nobody was saying out loud. Sung Jae started arriving earlier than the schedule required. Nobody pointed it out. Everybody noticed. He started smiling. Rarely. A flicker at the corner of his mouth. Gone the second anyone looked directly at him. Except Mr. Park always looked directly at him on purpose, just to watch him fight it. Then came the day Tessie stopped letting things slide. Sung Jae had quietly arranged a flight for a specialist. For a different patient of Tessie's entirely. A woman who couldn't afford care. He meant it as help. He thought it was a kindness too obvious to argue with. Tessie found him in the hallway and didn't bother lowering her voice. "Who told you to do that?" "Nobody. I was trying to help." "You weren't helping. You were skipping the part where you actually understand what she needs. She needs the surgery. She needs to not be terrified out of her mind, and a private flight from Seoul doesn't fix that. It just moves the fear somewhere more expensive." She stepped closer, arms crossed, not backing down an inch. "You think money is patience. It isn't. It's a shortcut you take, so you don't have to sit with anyone's pain for too long." Sung Jae's jaw tightened. Nobody spoke to him like this. Nobody was allowed to. "You do it with your father too," she said, quieter now but no softer. "He doesn't need a specialist flown in. He needs his son to sit down and ask how he's actually doing. You've never once asked him that. Have you?" He didn't answer. That was the answer. "Oh," he finally said. Just that. Came out smaller than he meant it to. He walked away first. She let him. Neither of them brought it up again. But something had cracked open that hadn't been there before. Not comfort, not yet. Just the first real wound either of them had let the other one see. That night, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Sung Jae sat beside his father and didn't ask about test results or treatment plans. "How are you?" he said. "Actually." Mr. Park looked at him for a long time before answering, like he was checking the question was real. "Scared," he finally admitted. Some days. It was the first true thing either of them had said to each other in years. Neither knew what to do with it, so they just sat there, in the kind of silence that meant something instead of nothing. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, deeply pleased with himself, and said nothing, which, for Daniel, was its own kind of miracle. The weeks that followed felt almost dangerously good. Mr. Park improved. The schedule held. Sung Jae kept showing up early. One evening, Mr. Park caught him by the window. "You look happier lately." "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Sung Jae didn't answer. He also didn't leave the window. Mr. Park decided that was answer enough and let it go. It was the calmest the family had felt in years, which should have been a warning. On an ordinary Thursday, Mr. Park didn't wake up the way he usually did. His breathing was shallow. Wrong. Tessie was in the room within minutes, her voice cracking at the edges as she called for help. By the time the test results came back, the warmth in that room had gone cold in a way nobody could explain away. The doctors needed to speak to the family. Mr. Park needed a kidney. Urgently. And there was no donor. The word, urgent, doesn't mean much until you hear it about someone you love. Then it means everything. Tessie worked every connection she had. Sung Jae worked every connection he had, and his were the kind that usually moved mountains. Calls went out to specialists, registries, private clinics in 3 countries. Nothing came back. A possible match appeared on day 4. Hope cracked the room open for 6 hours until the results came back wrong, and the door shut again harder than before. Sung Jae had spent his whole adult life believing money could outrun any problem, if you threw enough of it fast enough. This was the first wall it couldn't move. He sat in his father's room one evening, phone in hand, scrolling through a list of names that meant nothing anymore. "You can stop," Mr. Park said gently. "I'm not stopping." "Sung Jae." "I said I'm not stopping." His voice cracked on the last word. He didn't apologize for it. Mr. Park started preparing in his own quiet way. He gave Daniel his old wristwatch, the one with a cracked face that no longer kept time. "For when you're older," he said. He told Daniel things he'd never told anyone. About his wife, about a year he'd almost given up on everything, about the first time his son had ever made him laugh, decades ago, before grief made them both go quiet. Daniel listened to every word without interrupting once, which had never happened before. Then he asked the question that stopped the room cold. "Can I give you my kidney?" Nobody answered right away. "I have two," he said. "I checked. I only need one. You can have the other one." "Daniel," Mr. Park said softly, "it doesn't work that way. Your body is too small. It isn't ready for that." "Then when will it be ready?" "Not soon enough." The room went still. Daniel didn't cry yet. He just stood there, fists curled at his sides, like he was waiting for someone to tell him this was a joke. Nobody did. "You're not allowed to die," he said. His voice came out sharp, almost angry. "I haven't even finished teaching you chess. You're not allowed." "Daniel, I said you're not allowed." And then he broke. All at once, the way children do, loud, furious, grabbing fistfuls of the blanket like he could hold his grandfather there by force if he just gripped hard enough. He wasn't crying because he was scared. He was crying because, for the first time in his life, deciding something hadn't been enough to make it true. Tessie pulled him into her arms. He fought it for a second, then collapsed into her completely, sobbing into her shoulder while Mr. Park watched, helpless, his own eyes wet. Nobody said anything for a long time. There wasn't anything to say. Later that night, after Daniel had finally cried himself still, Tessie sat alone in the hallway and let herself fall apart too. Quietly, the kind of crying she usually saved for when no one could see. Sung Jae saw. He didn't say anything. He just sat down next to her, close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone, and let the silence hold them both. He had never once in his life felt this useless. All his money, all his power, none of it could fix the one thing in front of him. Something gave way in him that night, quietly, but it gave way. Daniel wasn't finished, even broken as he was. He never gave up. He still believed that something can be done. Anyhow, late that night, while Tessie finally slept, he picked up her phone. He didn't fully understand what he was about to do. He just knew the adults had run out of answers, and maybe somebody who wasn't an adult could find one. He typed slowly, one careful letter at a time. "My grandpa is sick. He needs a new kidney. He is the nicest person I know. He taught me chess even though I always win. Please help if you can." He hit post and went to sleep certain, the only kind of certain he had left. The next morning, Tessie's phone wouldn't stop. Messages, shares, strangers, hundreds of them, then thousands, people who had never met any of them. Reading about an old man none of them knew and deciding to care anyway. "Daniel, what did you do?" "I asked for help," he said, quieter than usual. "You always say adults don't fix everything. So I asked everybody. Not just adults." She didn't scold him. She couldn't. She just held him tight and didn't let go for a long moment and said, "That's not how the world works, baby." "Then how does it?" he asked, still in his mother's embrace. 3 days later, a message stopped her cold. A match, a real one. She read it twice before she believed it, then walked, slow and careful, like she didn't trust her own legs, into Mr. Park's room. "We found one," she said. "We found a donor." Nobody moved for a second, as if trying to really understand. Then Daniel jumped and screamed as one who has won all the games in life. Sung Jae, for the first time, didn't know how to control his feelings. He lifted Tessie up and swung her round in the room. Then seconds later he stopped mid-action. Realizing what he had done, he quickly put her down and apologized. "Sorry," he said, face filled with embarrassment. "It's okay," Tessie replied, face filled with blushes she couldn't hide. Then Mr. Park exhaled, long and shaking, like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. Daniel just watched as one whose plan and universe is finally working together. They finally found hope. If you're hoping right along with them, hit like and subscribe to see if Grandpa makes it through surgery. Surgery was scheduled for Friday. The relief didn't erase the fear. It just gave it somewhere else to sit. The night before, the family stayed together in Mr. Park's room, quiet in the particular way people get quiet the night before something that could change everything. Mr. Park looked at each of them slowly. His son, present in a way he hadn't been in years. The boy who had talked his way into being family. The woman who had carried them all without ever being asked to. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, This has already been the best part of my life. Daniel climbed up beside him on the bed, smaller and quieter than he'd been in weeks. You're not allowed to die, he said again. No anger this time. Just the words, soft, almost a whisper, like a promise he needed his grandfather to keep. Mr. Park pulled him close. I'll do my best, he said. It wasn't a yes, but it was enough for one night, for all of them to finally close their eyes. Friday came. The hallway outside the operating room felt longer than it had ever felt before. Daniel sat in a plastic chair too big for him, swinging his feet, not touching his juice box for once. Sung-jae sat beside him. Neither of them spoke much. He'll be fine, Daniel said after a while. He didn't sound like he was trying to convince anyone. He sounded like he'd already decided, the way he decided everything. You don't know that. I know it anyway. Sung-jae didn't argue with him. He'd learned by now that arguing with Daniel rarely worked, and right now he didn't have the strength to try. The hours moved slowly. A nurse passed and gave them a small nod. No news yet. Daniel kicked his feet against the chair leg, a steady, nervous rhythm. Sung-jae noticed his own hands were clenched and made himself unclench them. Neither one said they were scared. They didn't have to. At some point, without really deciding to, Daniel leaned sideways until his head rested against Sung-jae's arm. Sung-jae went still, surprised, then didn't move away. They stayed like that until a doctor finally walked through the doors. The surgery was successful. Tessie followed a moment later, exhausted, still in scrubs, but smiling for the first time in days. Daniel was up out of his chair before anyone could stop him. Can I see him? Soon, Tessie said, crouching to his level. He needs to rest first. Daniel nodded, but his eyes were already wet. Relief does that. It waits until it's safe, then it all comes out at once. Sung-jae stood slowly, and for a moment, just looked at Tessie. Really looked. Then he did something none of them expected. He reached out and pulled both of them into him, Daniel and Tessie together, holding on like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission to do it. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. Mr. Park recovered slowly the way old men do. A week of rest, careful steps, a new kind of color in his face that hadn't been there in months. Sung-jae visited every single day. Not because of a schedule taped to a wall. Because he wanted to. One evening, he sat by his father's bed and finally said the thing he'd never said. I should have asked how you were doing a long time ago. Mr. Park looked at him for a moment. You're asking now. It took almost losing you. It took a 7-year-old, Mr. Park said, smiling. But yes, you're asking now. They sat together in a silence that finally felt easy instead of heavy. Tessie and Sung-jae didn't rush anything. There was no proposal, no big declaration, just dinners that started happening more often. Phone calls that lasted longer than they needed to. A man who used to check his watch every 5 minutes, now in no hurry to leave. One afternoon, Daniel found them sitting together on a bench outside the hospital. Not saying much, just sitting close. He walked up, looked at both of them, and nodded once, like a man confirming a business deal had finally closed. I told you, he said. You needed each other. Neither of them argued. There wasn't anything left to argue. Months later, Mr. Park sat in the garden behind his house, watching Daniel cheat at chess again, while Tessie laughed at something Sung-jae said under his breath. He thought about how close he'd come to not seeing any of this. He thought about how much of his life he'd spent simply waiting to be done with it, quietly, without complaint. He didn't feel that way anymore. He looked at his son, finally unguarded. Tessie finally not alone. At the boy who had walked into his hospital room one afternoon and asked if he was going to die, and never once let him believe the answer was yes. I can die in peace now, he thought. I've already gotten more than I ever expected. As if Daniel had heard him, he looked up from the chessboard. You're not allowed to die, he said. Plain. Certain. Mr. Park laughed, loud and full, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep. I'll do my best, he said. Daniel went back to the chessboard satisfied, already planning his next move. 3 generations. A family that should never have existed, sitting together in the same garden, laughing about nothing in particular. If this story made you smile, made you cry, or made you believe in the kind of family that finds you when you least expect it, share it with someone who needs that reminder today.